Davos is a loyal man, speaks with utter honesty, and is a great advisor. But before A Game of Thrones, he was one of the most notorious smugglers in all the Seven Kingdoms. So this video, let's talk about Davos before the books. When we meet Davos, he is a knight, but also a slight man of low birth with a commoner's face who had remained humble despite his elevation. Over his thin shoulders, he would wear simple clothing, such as a green or brown cloak stained by spray and salt and faded from the sun, a brown doublet, a blue tunic, and breeches that would match his brown hair and eyes. By the time of the books, his small beard is peppered with gray, his hair is thinning, and he wears leather gloves, used to hide his shortened fingers on one hand. However, before we knew him, Davos, of course, was a baby and grew up in Flea Bottom. He was born in Flea Bottom of King's Landing to a hard life. Growing up, the Septons taught Davos to pray to the crone for wisdom, the warrior for courage, the smith for strength, and so on. And when he begged for copper, sometimes the Septons would feed him. Growing up in this harsh environment, begging to survive, young Davos dreamed of riches and being well off. However, as he grew up, he would instead wish for a few acres of land, a hall to grow old in, and a better life for his sons. Though by the time of the books Davos's mother is dead, he remembers some of her wisdom while growing up in Flea Bottom, such as wine being better than a compress for a cough. When exactly he developed a belief in luck is unknown, but Davos would remain superstitious about luck all his life. And like many of those born and raised in Flea Bottom, he would never learn to read, only being given that opportunity to learn much later in life. Davos wouldn't stay in Flea Bottom for long, seeking opportunity elsewhere. One day, still a boy, he joined the service of Ra-Ra Yahorus, a Tyroshi smuggler pirate known as the Blind Bastard, though he was neither a bastard or blind. The Blind Bastard had a ship called the Cobble Cat that Davos began to work on. The boy learned much from the Blind Bastard, such as a clever smuggler didn't overreach or draw too much attention to himself. Also that every city, just like a woman, had a unique smell. For instance, King's Landing reeked like some unwashed whore. During his years as a cabin boy on the Cobble Cat, he visited many locations. One place, White Harbor, was a city Davos was always fond of and loved to visit. Though he did do activities that took coin from the purses and food from the tables of the occupants of the city, Davos believes he never took enough for Lord Manderley to miss a meal. When he visited the city, he often saw seals basking on the broken rocks, and the Blind Bastard always made him count them, believing the more seals, the more luck that they would have on their voyage. Perhaps being around sailors and smugglers that were superstitious made Davos believe in luck, or maybe believe in it more strongly. Eventually, the Blind Bastard sailed in the Shivering Sea with Davos aboard and began to visit 100 coves that had never seen a trading ship before. The Cobble Cat brought steel, swords, helms, axes, good chainmail to trade for ivory, amber, obsidian, and furs. The ship would then go back south when her holds were full. However, one day when Davos was younger than 12 years old, in the Bay of Seals, 3 black galleys manned by members of the Night's Watch came to bring the ship in to East Watch by the Sea. The ship lost its cargo, and the Blind Bastard was beheaded for trading weapons to wildlings. Davos would never forget the sight of the Blind Bastard's head rolling across the deck, but he continued to trade with the members of the Night's Watch, considering them hard enemies, but good customers if you had the right cargo. He would also remember the wildlings as fair thieves, bad hagglers, and men like any other, some fair, some foul. He would also remember one of them making off with their cabin girl. After the death of the Blind Bastard, Davos then made his own way, securing his own small ship, and began his journey of becoming the most infamous smuggler in the Seven Kingdoms, using his black-sailed ship to sneak into harbors at the dead of night to steal. He made visits to many harbors, including revisiting White Harbor a few times. When returning to the city in the books, Davos would note that the city's defenses were strengthened since his last visit, though his last visit was about 6 years before the books. He also visited the Three Sisters during his smuggling years, as they had been a favorite haunt of smugglers for hundreds of years and pirates' nests before that. One town on the Three Sisters, Cintron, he particularly hated. He remembered it as a vile town, small, mean, and rank, with odors of pig shit and rotting trash. Davos also bought cargoes from Salador San during his smuggling years. At some point, being a smuggler, Davos began to love the smell of the salt in the air and the sea. He loved the water and found he slept best when he had a deck rocking beneath him and the sighing of the wind in his rigging. He became a strong swimmer and considered himself to always have been a sailor, meant to die at sea. He knew his ship as well as others, feeling safer knowing whether the sail on the horizon belonged to a slow or fast ship, whether the captain was a young man hungry for glory, or an old man serving out his days. As a smuggler, he would often listen for the pounding of the oarmaster's drum, the thrum of the sail, the swish and creak of oars to let him know if trouble was coming. Many a morning did he wake with dread in his heart to those sounds. Usually it meant old Tristamon's sea watch was coming, and that meant death to smugglers while Ares II was on the throne. He also learned the tides and when to seize them. During these years, he also discovered how to get a sense if a man was wrong. And he spent some time within a few jails and dungeons. But don't feel too bad for the times Davos was imprisoned. There was always other prisoners to talk to, sharing hopes and fears. While he fought his share of sword-to-sword fights on a wet deck, in general he learned that smugglers do not sound war horns or raise their banners. They smell danger, they raise sail, and they run before the wind. He also learned the waterfront of King's Landing better than the back of his hand. As he claimed, he had not spent a good part of his life sneaking in and out of the back of his hand. He learned to decipher maps and charts, but letters and writing would stay beyond his skills until much later in the books. Also at some point, he decided he hated his vision being impeded and wouldn't wear a visor with a helm, nor would he wear mail or heavy armor. He believed at sea, heavy steel was as like to cause a man his life as to save it. Though the gods never meant much to him, he would sometimes make offerings to the warrior before battle, the mother whenever his wife grew great with child, or the smith when he launched a ship. Speaking of his wife growing pregnant, eventually he did marry a woman named Maria, someone he considered the best woman in the world. She is a plump, good-natured woman who during the books has sagging breasts and a kind smile. She once said to Davos, "Only a starving man begs bread from a beggar." Together they would have 7 kids: Dale, Allard, Mathos, Merrick, Devon, Stannis, and Stefan. And in the time of the books, Davos would think of his sons as good men, good fighters, and better sailors. By the end of his smuggling years, it was said no one handled a ship by night half so well as Davos Shorthand, and he was known as the most notorious and elusive smuggler in all the 7 kingdoms. Oh, and by the end of his smuggling years, Davos could also say for certain, despite 40 years of smuggling before the books, he had never once rammed a ship with a ship. Everything would change for him when a rebellion broke out in the 7 kingdoms. During Robert's rebellion, Davos' smuggling skills would make all the difference in Stannis remaining in control of Storm's End. During the war, Lord Mace Tyrell laid siege to Storm's End for a year, but he couldn't take the castle. It is stated that since the war had come quickly, the storehouses and granaries within Storm's End were only half full, not enough to hold out indefinitely. They couldn't even get help by sea, as the red wine galleys made a blockade. By the end of the year, the garrison at Storm's End under Stannis became hungry, and they may have starved if not for Davos. They had eaten the horses, the dogs, and cats, and were down to roots and rats when a new moon came and black clouds hid the stars. In this darkness, Davos took his little ship with its black hull, black sails, and black oars, filled it with onions and saltfish, and entered Shipbreaker Bay. As he steered his tiny boat, the water hit against his hull, and he saw the 1,000 flickering campfires burning around the castle. The sails snapped and cracked with every hit of the wind, and finally he was forced to pull them down and go with muffled oars. His heart was in his throat as he slipped smoothly through the blockade of red wine galleys that had grown lax after being there for so long. Once at the castle, he distributed the food to the men. With this food, the garrison would last long enough for Ned Stark to reach Storm's End and break the siege. Stannis rewarded Davos with his choice of lands on Cape Wrath, a small keep, and knighthood. Afterwards, Davos chose the last name Seaworth for his new house and took a black ship on a pale gray field with an onion on its sail for his house banner. But the Onion Knight didn't get off that easy. For the crime of being a smuggler, Stannis decreed that he should lose a joint of each finger on his left hand, since one good act doesn't wash out the bad, nor does a bad act wash out the good. Each should have its own reward, and he believed Davos to be a hero and a smuggler. Davos had accepted the terms, but on the condition that Stannis did the deed himself, that he would accept no punishment from lesser hands. Stannis agreed, using a butcher's knife, cutting clean and true, with no anger, only an iron sense of justice. Davos would wear the bones of his cut-off fingers in a little pouch that hung from a leather thong around his neck for luck, to remind him of what he was, where he came from, and Stannis' justice. The man stated that Stannis had done him a favor by giving him 4 less fingernails to clean and trim, and that even with missing the 4 joints, his fingers were still long enough to wrap around a woman's throat, especially a slender one. Honestly, Davos appears to have no anger over Stannis' justice and taking of some of his fingers. He was grateful that Stannis had spared his son Allard from ending up on the wall if he had remained a smuggler, and that Stannis was just in what he did, and everything he became, he owed to Stannis. He felt honored that Stannis gave him his knighthood, a place of honor among Stannis, a small keep on Cape Wrath where his wife was the mistress with servants who called her Milady, and woods where Davos could hunt red deer. Later, Stannis would give him his own war galley, Black Betha. As a knight under the service of Stannis, Davos had the opportunity to visit King's Landing many times when calling on Stannis at court. He saw King Robert many times, but never spoke to the man. He was present with Stannis at King's Landing when Robert staged a tourney for Joffrey's name day. He remembered the tourney and seeing Thoros Emir fighting in the melee with his flaming sword, a colorful show with his red robes flapping and his sword with pale green flames. However, he also remembers the fire going out and Royce braining him with a common mace. Despite being made a knight, there would be plenty of lords that wouldn't respect Davos for his origins in Flea Bottom. They would scorn his sons as well, even though his sons would often forget they were ever low-born. In spite of the scorn, Davos has hope that his grandsons will joust with those lords' grandsons, and that one day their blood would mix. That one day his sigil would fly as high as the Celtigars or the Velaryons. That is Davos Seaworth before A Game of Thrones. Thanks for watching, please like, subscribe, and come back for more videos. Also, huge thanks to those that support me on Patreon for voting for this video.